Hi everybody, it's Sue again. I am just glad we can get together one last night. Tonight I think we're going to finish our tunic. Once again, it's Sue from slowideas.com. Sorry, it's been one hell of a Wednesday. Super busy, and as you can tell, I'm a couple minutes late getting started, so anyways, I'm all set up and I've done some work on finishing, but not all of it, so I can show you what we're doing. We're making a simple tunic top. Here it is here. There we go. Oops. There we go. I'm making view B. I've made a few adjustments to the styling. I did some pattern alterations so that it would fit my bust better and fit my back a little bit better. I added some darts to the front for a little bit of extra shaping, and I replaced the facings, which are fabric sort of strips that are used to finish the edges of open areas of a garment. I replaced the facings with a bias binding finish. And today I'm going to show you again how that works. I'm going to show it to you the way I've finished it on the neckline. I've finished one of the armholes, and so we'll do the rest of that today. We're also going to finish the other side seam. I've done one side seam so you can see what it looks like, and just to get us a little bit further ahead. This is not a Martha Stewart cooking show where I have multiple projects at various phases that I can just pick them up and show you step by step. That would require way too much organizing and executive function, and just no. So yeah, we're gonna do the sides and the vents on the top, because this has, let's see if we can, ooh, that's better. That's a much better view. You can sort of see that it has these little sticky-oty vents there. Yeah, no, doesn't work. I really am missing having my iPhone camera working as a webcam. I don't know why the last 2 days it hasn't worked, but I'm a little bit cheesed because I spent $11 on the software for my iPhone so that it would talk to my computer, and it's really inconsistent. So I got to do some troubleshooting there before I make more videos, which I'm planning to do. Alrighty, so let's just get to the garment, because that's where I can actually start sounding like I know what I'm talking about. Here we have the tunic. It's on Madeline. Yay! Madeline is my dress form. Madeline the mannequin. So it's starting to actually look like a real shirt. Let's just tip that forward and you can maybe get a better view of it. There. And there. So I've got the V-neck is finished, and it sits pretty flat unless the collar starts to take over. And I may actually press a crease into the collar there so that it won't sort of flap open quite as much and pull the collar open, but I don't mind because that is a really nice clean finish there. On the armhole, I'm not quite as happy with how this turned out. It gapes a little bit and it's just quite a loose armhole. I think it's something that, and I'm a bit surprised about this actually, because I did a full bust adjustment, which should have brought that, well, it did bring this armhole angle and made this a tighter curve by about 1/2 inch. I didn't do anything to the back armhole though, and I think that's, you know, possibly something I would do next time. Although the side seam does sit nicely down the side of the dress form, so who knows? The back is a little on the loose side on my dress form. I haven't tried it on pinned on me yet, but yeah, I'm just a little bit worried because this is popping up a little bit and gaping. So I would Next time I make this, I will probably pinch a little bit out of the pattern at the armhole just to close that a little bit and not have that gap there. About a 1/2 inch transitional dart to the shoulder, or just pinch it out of the pattern, and then it should fit better. It's a little bit loose back here, but it is supposed to be because there's no zippers in this garment, so I would have no way of getting in and out of it if it was fitted. So, all right, so I'm going to take this off the dress form and just show you in a little bit more detail what the insides look like now that I've finished doing the hand sewing that I did last night. So let's just switch over to the tabletop view, because then you have a slightly better close-up. It's not super close-up, but it's a little bit better camera angle. Okay, so the neckline, let's go to the inside of this garment here. The neckline is, the collar has been sewn on, and the seam allowances of that, the raw edges, and the raw edges of the shirt itself are tucked inside this strip of bias binding, which is a strip of fabric cut out on a diagonal of the fabric, and then I've just prepared this. I've used my iron and folded it in half, and then folded each of the raw outside edges to the center, and so that is a prepared piece of bias tape. Yeah, there are some really nifty ways of making bias tape at home. That is a subject for another video. So at the front here, I'm super proud of how this turned out. Let's just hold that up so you can see it. It looks nice and flat and clean, and the point is flat. There's no wrinkles. There's a few stitches where I stitched the bias binding down. I went around by hand and sewed the outside edge, the outside folded edge of the bias tape to the fabric using teeny tiny little stitches, maybe picking up 2 or 3 stitches from the fabric every sort of 3 millimeters or so. And I did the same thing on the armhole, so it's nice and cleanly finished. So that's the inside of it there. It's just this strip. It takes all of the rough edges of the armhole and puts them inside this tape, so it won't fray or anything. So, and then the side seam, this is what we're gonna start on tonight. I did one of the side seams already, so we could see what it looks like finished, and so I could plan out and see if it would work. This is a French seam, so it traps all of the rough edges of the linen inside. It won't fray. And then the vent is just sewn with the fabric is folded over and then folded over again. Each of them about 3/8 of an inch. So yeah, it looks really clean and crisp, and I sewed the end of the French seam to the top of that fold with a zigzag stitch, so it looks you know, from the inside it's a little Monet. It's nice from a distance, messy as hell when you get up close, but from the outside there's some zigzag stitching, but I think I could have done that a little bit tidier. But the fabric itself is such a wild pattern that it's not going to stand out like a sore thumb. So what are we doing now? Well, a couple of things. One thing I did before was I stay stitched the edges of the armholes so that they would not stretch out of shape. Oh, can you even see me? Yes, you can. Hi. Sorry. And I'm going to do the same thing on the vents down here. And my disappearing fabric marker has once again disappeared on me. So fortunately, I marked this side with chalk, so I can use that as the basis to tell me how far up the vent goes on this side as well. So I'll just line up the sides here and grab my chalk. I keep it in this chalk holder thing so that my hands don't get all chalky, but sometimes it hides deep down inside there. Okay, so I've got not a very small precise mark, but I have a mark, and I'm just going to use my sewing machine here to sew about a ½ inch, actually about 3/8 inch in from that dot down to the bottom of the garment. Oh, and look, there we go. Okay. Oh no, I don't want to zigzag. I'm working on another project, so I'm going back and forth on my stitching types. I don't have to backstitch because it's not a seam. Where's my other half? Oh, there it is, way over there. Hi, come over here. Okay. And I should sew from the top to the bottom because it's going, yes, then the fibers are falling off and away from my needle, not coming in towards my needle. Generally speaking, on vertical seams on garments, you want to go from the top to the bottom. Okay, let's just get my iron up to temperature here. It's on synthetic, but I want it on linen, the hottest setting. Okay, so I've just done that stay stitching because it's really handy to have it done first, because it gets harder and harder as I start putting the French seams in. So I'll show you once again how to do a French seam. It's this really nifty way of doing a seam on fabric that frays, because it tucks all the loose edges inside and you don't have to worry about them coming loose and your seams coming undone on your garment in the wash or when you're wearing it. No wardrobe malfunctions. So I'm just lining up. Now, one thing I discovered when I was sewing this before is that my side seams somehow are still not the same length, even though I tried as hard as I could to make them the same length. They turned out to not be. So the front is just a little bit longer than the back. And well, all I'm going to do is just stretch it a bit while I'm sewing. So this actually adds a little bit of shaping to the garment. Not ideal, but it'll survive. It's a fairly loose weave fabric, so it won't make a huge amount of difference. And to do a French seam, the first time I sew my fabric layers together with the wrong sides together, which is the exact opposite of what you normally do. And I'm sewing just barely a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If I needed to, I could move that guiding tape over, but I'm getting pretty good at sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this machine. But yeah, having a piece of masking tape on your machine bed that you can use to show you where your edge of your fabric should go along, super cool trick for sewing straight lines. Just a reminder, I'm not watching the needle, I'm watching what the edge of my fabric is doing. Okay. There we go. Alrighty. So I've done that layer. I'm going to press it as I sewed it. Sue's favorite sewing rule. Once you've sewn, you have to press it. I'm just going to try to trim off any loose threads as I go. Hi! Alright, and I'm going to just trim that edge so there's no bits sticking out. It's a nice, clean, sharp edge. I don't want to get too close to my own stitching, I just want to take any raw bits off. Okay. And then I will open it up. Now I've sewn the other side as well, so getting this to go flat so I can press seams is gonna get mighty tricky. If I had an ironing board, I would put it on the ironing board, but I don't actually own an ironing board. Oops. So I use this. This is just a thick piece of cardboard with foam padding around it, wrapped in heat treated or heat proof canvas. And it's what I have covering my sewing table as well. So it just acts as a separate ironing surface, and so I can stick it inside things and press without pressing what's underneath. So I'm just going to press that to one side. There we go. And then I'll turn my shirt inside out so that there's now the clean side is to the middle. The rough edges are to the outside of the garment right now, but they're really thin, like they're really narrow. So what the French seam does is we're going to do another seam along here, and that will trap all of those raw edges inside and give us a really clean seam on the inside of our garment. Yay! Before I do that final step, I'm going to free up the edges of my vents here because I could trap them oddly diagonally inside the French seam. So I'm going to use my super sharp tiny scissors that have like this very small point, and I'm going to trim from where my French seam will stop out to my stay stitching. And that'll just kind of free that up and make it easier for me to do this French seam. There's more trimming to come, but bear with me. This is tricky. Okay, there we go. Now I can sew my French seam from the top to the bottom again. I'm going to press that again so that it's really flat and crisp. Don't want any wrinkly bits. And I'm going to try to end my seam, my French seam here. I'm going to try and end it. I should try to end it right on the dot that I marked, but I seem to have gone further down than that. So my vents aren't going to be the same size. Oops. This is actually starting to bug me here. So I'm going to take it off for now. And I'm sewing just slightly more than a 3/4 inch seam allowance. Or not 3/4. Yikes! Quarter, just slightly more than a 1/4 inch seam allowance, somewhere between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch. That way I know that that raw edge that I trimmed is going to get tucked all inside this. Okay, so I've sewn down to where I made the trims on my vents. So hopefully this will work out. You'd think I'd have this like planned out in advance or something, but I often do not. And it looks like actually one of my dots was in a different position on one side compared to the other. That's fascinating. My vents are no longer the same length, but I don't think they are on the other side either. No, the back is about 1/4 of an inch longer. Noted. I could try to fix that with some very careful trimming, or I might just fix it when I do the hem. Okay, so that having been sewn gets pressed. And now I'm going to turn the vent. I'm going to work on each side, and I'm going to turn over about 1/4 of an inch on this edge. I'll do a little finger press first. The lovely thing about working with linen is sometimes just the heat and pressure of your own fingers can actually start that going. I just realized I didn't change the title of today's YouTube feed. It's not about attaching the collar. The collar is already attached. This is about finishing the side seams and doing the armhole binding and the hem. Okay, so I've turned that. I just do each side. I do the same steps on each side. Otherwise I get lost and confused. Right, and then I want to fold this over one more time, but I can't because it's got that stay stitching and it hasn't been clipped far enough. Now if I clip this, there's no more stay stitching to hold it in place. So I'm going to actually take my French seam line down another 1/2 inch. And that'll reinforce the bottom of this seam. Nothing's going to start coming undone. Everything is protected. Not super well, but we're working with linen. Things go wrong all the time. Just trim off those threads. Okay, and now I can trim through that stay stitching just a little bit further. Okay, so now I am able to fold that back one more time on itself and make that fold. This will finish all the raw edges inside this double fold. Press that. And I'll do the other side. And then I will run a row of stitching from the vent opening down to the bottom of each of these. That'll be a little bit tricky because I've got to kind of separate out the layers. But this is why I'm glad I did those slits, because now I've got a little bit of extra maneuvering room here. What is my top thread doing? There we go. All right. Trying to make sure I don't get anything else caught under the needle of my machine. Okay. Okay, and the other side. And we're almost done this side seam. I have to sew this with the loose edge on the other side of the presser foot, which is a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of an ambidextrous left brain or right brain thinking with the other side exercise. But they say that's good for us and it prevents the onset of dementia, so let's just go with that. Okay, there's one last step before we're done with this vent. If this fabric wasn't quite so prone to fraying, I would just call it a day right now. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to decide which direction I want this seam allowance to sit, to the front or to the back. And I'm going to press it in that direction, and I'm going to zigzag over so that I zigzag the bottom of this French seam to something and anchor it so that it won't fray away. Because that point right there, you can't see it very well, but there's all kinds of loose threads there starting to fray already, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to get this pressing. I should press it towards the back because up here at the dart, there's all those extra seam allowance-y stuffs on the front, and it'll just sit better if I press it to the back. I think I actually did the opposite on the first side because I was just experimenting and playing around, but then I realized, oh, I should have pressed it the other way. So we'll do it right on our second go round. It's nice that there's a second side seam that I have to do things right on, and I can fix my mistakes. Alrighty. Yeah, rubbing back and forth there kind of pulled some of this loose stitching around. That's why I say press up and down, but I just didn't, and now I've kind of distorted the weave of my fabric a little bit, but it'll survive. Okay, so I'm just putting it on the machine and I'm just sewing across the top of the vent. This isn't a sew along really, so I'm sorry that you can't see it in more detail. I want a zigzag and I want it to go wide because I want it to catch both the top of the vent and the bottom of my French seam. And this will sort of stop those parts from fraying just by wrapping a little stitching around it. There we go. Trim off my threads. So many little bits and threads. Okay, that looks actually really good on this side. It looked a little rough on the other side seam, but it looks pretty good on this one. So oh, you can't even really see where this, oh, there's where the vent goes. God, that's an awful laptop webcam. Sheesh. Sorry. Okay. And I'm just going to give this one last sort of press flat just to make things relax here a little bit. There we go. Okay, so our side seams are done. What's left? I'm going to show you how I will do this armhole with the bias. And I won't do all the hand stitching on it because we would be here all night. However, I'll show you how I'm going to do it, and then I'll leave the hand stitching to be done off camera. But then I will do, actually what I'll do right now is I'll do this hem. Because we're pretty much done. We got the hem, we've got the armhole to finish, and then we're done. Yay! So, yeah. So this is a pretty easy thing. We don't have to do anything special with it. We're just basically treating it the same as with the vent, only a little bit wider. We're going to fold over 1/4 of an inch. And then, oh, something's going on here with my computer. It's buffering. Yeah, everyone says it's healthy, so who knows? Can't tell if it's working or not. Gotta love that. No one's actually watching to tell me. My 7 listeners. Even the Q does better than me. Okay, that's a local joke for those of you in Victoria. The 100.3 the Q radio station, and there's 7 listeners. That one's been running since the 80s. Okay, so I'm just going along here, and I am eyeballing 1/4 of an inch to turn it up, and pressing as I go. Heaven love linen because it presses so easily. At the corner here, I want to be careful that as I go along, I haven't pushed the edge of my hem so that it warps outward over the vent. So I'm just going to sort of push that in and press up and down there and try and have it not be overlappy. That's a technical term. Overlappy. And now is where I want to try to get this to be relatively straight and consistent, because it will be a little visible. So I'm going to get a ruler, and I want it to be turned up. I'm actually tall. I don't want this to get too short. I'm going to turn it up a 5/8 inch. That's not a super huge hem, but like I said, because I'm tall, I don't want to lose too much length in the garment. If you were shorter, you might do like 1 inch, perhaps. So I'm going to press it, or just sort of fold it over with my hands, and then just kind of check whether it's the right width every so often, and sort of finger press along the edge. And finger pressing actually works with this fabric, and then I'll just sort of come back in and use my iron to press it in place. So, it's hard. You kind of need to be an octopus. I'll throw a couple of pins in here just to keep it in position while I'm going along the whole thing. So I'll just measure this along here to make sure I'm getting it about the same. See, I would have overfolded. There we go. Okay, this is a slightly curved edge, so as I'm doing this, I kind of have to just like push it a little bit with my fingers so that it makes that curve. It's not much of a curve, just slightly. There's a whole bunch of different techniques you can use for curved hems. Like if you're doing a circle skirt, which seems like a really basic sewing project, just, cut a circle and put a waistband on. But the hem of a circle skirt can be a real mofo to sew. But there are tricks, as there are for pretty much everything in sewing. I'll eyeball it in some places and measure it where I think I need to. I think I'm doing pretty good here. Throw a couple pins in. And I'll measure this final bit to make sure that's consistent. And press. I don't know what's happened to my YouTube feed. It's just showing me a loading symbol and I don't know why. Everything seems fine. It's just not showing me my previews. Maybe it's not working at all. I won't know until I'm done. Which I think I'm going to be done pretty soon here. So I'll press this in place a few more times. And now I have a choice here. I could machine stitch this, or I could hand stitch this edge. And actually, I am going to hand stitch a hem. This is very rare for me, but I quite like the linen, and I think that a hand stitched hem will flatter. This fabric deserves hand stitching. It's been good fabric. So even though the vents here are machine stitched, and I could easily just go along here and run a line of stitching along there, I'm going to do it by hand. On the other side, now what we discovered was that one of these was longer than the other. So I'll figure out what's going on with this. So I've got my top edge that's got its finished, and then here's my bottom edge, and I'm just going to simulate if I do a 1/4 inch turn up and then a 5/8 inch, I'm going to be 5/8 of an inch longer roughly than the front section. That's just going to look accidental. That's kind of annoying. On the other end, is it the same? Yep, it's about the same. So turn it in a 1/4, turn it up 5/8 inch, and yeah, it's like not even the same on either side. So super annoying. So what I will do now is I'm going to measure, just take this out and see from where this hem starts. So here I need to take off hardly any fabric, like that much, so that it'll turn out the same. And on this side, I have to take out, yeah, about 1/2 of an inch here. And I'm going to assume it goes somewhere between 1/2 of an inch and 3/8 of an inch all along. So I will mark a bit of a line here, and I'll just cut it. And then I'm going to repeat what I've done. And I'll be leaving my hand stitching for some off-camera stuff. I'll do a little video review at the end, post another video later tonight or maybe tomorrow after I've done all this hand stitching that sort of shows what the finished product looks like, because we're not going to get a finished product on camera tonight. I'm getting hungry, to be honest. It's time for me to go and finish my dinner. I'll cut that and then I'll hand stitch it in a little while. The other part of this, I'll show you quickly. Just trim off all of that. So I'm going to go open up my bias tape. So I've got the top edge and it folds towards me. And I'm leaving a couple of inches to the outside. And I'm going to pin, I'm going to start a couple of inches in away from that side seam, but I will pin the edge of the, pinning along the fold line of the bias tape and matching that to the stay stitching on the arm. I need to trim the stay stitching on the arm. This is a pretty hefty curve it's going around, so it will not go around it evenly if there's all this extra seam allowance here. It just can't make the turn because this is a smaller circumference than this, so it just can't fold around itself. The top part is more or less straight. Once again, this is a bottom curve, and I'm going to trim in to the stay stitching to make it easier for my bias tape to make it around that curve. Okay, so pinning this in place. Yes, there are some really mundane parts of sewing, and you get to see them all, except for the hand stitching part, because I wouldn't put you through that. I expect I'll just turn on some Prime Video or Netflix or something like that and while away the time watching or other listening to something that I don't need to watch to still get the plot and enjoy. That's kind of how I do a lot of my sewing, is with something on. I watch a lot of Project Runway that way. I should start watching people's sewing videos, actually. I was watching one last night, actually. I will tell you about this. I was watching a sewing video last night from a woman called Liz Sews. I think I told you about her last night. She does this tutorial on YouTube of how to draft your own knickers using your own body measurements. So I did that. I'm in the process of making my own knickers. Pretty cool. So she posts a bunch of videos about what she's going to sew every month and then what she has sewn every month. And it's I don't know, it's like watching reality TV for sewers. So other sewing shows that I like, the Making the Cut video that Heidi Klum and Tim Gunn have just done. And I really liked the Netflix design show as well. Okay, I've pinned all the way around and now I need to join up my two bias tapes. So to do this, I'm going to sort of fold this end back and bring the other side towards it and figure out where they will join when they're sewn to this garment and mark that line with my non-sharpened chalk marker. Not great, but it shows me where it should be. And then I'll just sort of pull the other layers away so that I just have the bias tape in my hands like this. And try to line up the edges so that these two pieces of tape go straight together, right sides together, and then I'll pin, hopefully in a way that allows me to sew this seam fairly accurately. And I'm just going to straight stitch across this. This is not how you normally join bias tape. Normally you try to join the bias tape on a diagonal seam, like quilting and stuff like that. However, it doesn't matter that much in this case. That's a zigzag stitch. Straight stitch is what I want. Okay. And I'll just press that. Ta-da. And I'm going to trim 1/4 of an inch away from my seam. Wow, I had just enough of this bias tape left over. Whew. Okay, and I'll press it open as well. Oh, I sewed that closed. Shoot. Well, I don't think it'll be a huge deal in the end. Hopefully not. Just open that. I'm trying to figure out if that's going to be a huge deal. Actually, yes, it will. So I can just show you my seam rippers. I was wondering if I would make it through the entire series without showing you my seam rippers. This is a scalpel that I use sometimes. It's just a medical grade scalpel. Got it from, I think, Rexall, one of the home healthcare stores. The handle was not cheap. It's a stainless steel, German stainless steel scalpel handle, but the blades are pretty cheap. And this is really great for picking stitches out. So you got to be really careful, but it just gets right in there, even the smallest stitches. You can get that scalpel pick in there. I have this guard that I made out of electrical tape. I'm sure there's probably medical scalpel guards, or maybe there aren't because they're not supposed to reuse their blades. I don't know. But it works like a hot damn for picking out stitches. And now I can re-sew the seam with that bit not folded down. Okay. Okay. So now I have these bits joined, and I can go back and I can repin that part to the stay stitching, just below the stay stitching actually. Voila! This is now ready to sew. Get all these scissors out of the way, get the sharp tools out of the way. And I'm going to take the storage container off of my machine, and that makes the machine smaller here, and it's easier to fit the arms of things in it. So it's kind of a nice feature to have. It's called a free arm if you're in the market for a sewing machine. Okay. Get my pin cushion here so I'm ready to take pins out as I go. So I gotta really carefully go around my corners because I've got straight thing being matched up with a curved thing, and some of my pins are even curved. That's gotta go. Sorry, I'm not very talkative when I'm actually sewing a seam. Because I'm concentrating on not screwing up. I'm getting to this final corner and I just want to make sure I move the rest of the garment fabric around the corner so I don't end up with any weird puckers or tucks in my sewn into my seam here. I think I'm good. Let's see how that worked out. You know what? I did this wrong. I did this totally wrong. I should have pinned the bias tape to the right side of the fabric and sewn it on that way. And then what I would do, I'm just going to show you this, and then I'm going to end because damn, I need food. I will trim off the seam allowance, the excess from the garment. I'll fold the bias tape once over itself, once down so that it lines up with the seam that attached it. And then I'll fold it one more time. It'll go to the inside of the garment and not the outside of the garment, and pin that in place and press it in place. And then I will go around and hand stitch that part there once I have unstitched it from my fabric. But this is my opportunity to show you my other seam ripping tools. So the scalpel is really good for picking things out. I also have this kit, which is actually from Lee Valley Tools here in Canada. I don't know if they're in the States or not. Man, if they're not in the States, you guys are missing out. It has this chestnut tools. I think it's sold at chestnuttools.com. Actually, it's got their URL here in their kit. It comes with, these are plastic handles, but they're scalpel blades, metal scalpel blades. And this is their picker. And then they also have this thing called a Pro Seam Ripper, which is a scalpel with a rounded point on it. And this is a blessing. This is a total blessing. Because what I can do is I can actually just sort of muscle it up to a seam and slip it in, and then the blade can go between the layers of fabric and cut the stitches, but not pierce through the fabric. Now this is delicate work. It requires focus, because if you angle this in the wrong direction, you'll end up cutting through your fabric. And I don't have any more of this fabric, and I don't want a hole in my fabric, so I've got to do this slowly and carefully. So that means that's pretty much the end of tonight's show. I'm gonna just have to do this really, really carefully. So obviously it is time for me to go and possibly get something to nibble on. And I hope you've enjoyed this adventure in sewing, and maybe it's inspired you to bring the sewing machine out of your closet, let it stop languishing, and start experimenting. If you have any questions about how to get started or what might be a good project for a beginner, feel free to leave comments. I would love to see your comments, and I will get back to you. I might, if you have any requests for shows, I might do something like that. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys want. And feel free to, and please subscribe to my channel. That way you'll get notifications when I do make new things. And since we're in crazy pandemic times, I'll be sewing a lot more and trying to capture some of it for you, because I want to inspire you. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great night. Go grab something to eat, like that's what I'm gonna do right now. Take care.